The great crystal dome of Velthara Prime sparkled under twin suns as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for another routine session of the Galactic Consul. The building itself was a marvel of peaceful engineering, grown rather than built, its walls transparent and flowing like frozen water. Gardens stretched endlessly beyond the dome, filled with plants from 1,000 worlds, all living together in perfect harmony. This was how the galaxy worked now, had worked for 3,000 years of unbroken peace. Ambassador Deho walked through the entrance halls, his simple black suit making him stand out among the colorful robes and natural forms of other delegates. He was one of only 12 humans in the entire consul, representing a species that had joined just 2 years ago. Most other delegates barely noticed him as he passed, too busy discussing trade routes and cultural exchange programs. The humans were still new, still unknown, still considered by many to be just another peaceful species eager to join galactic civilization. The assembly hall buzzed with quiet conversation as delegates took their assigned positions. Each species had their own section designed for their specific needs. The aquatic cetaceans floated in large water tanks, their dolphin-like forms graceful even in artificial environments. The crystalline beings from the core worlds stood on raised platforms that channeled energy through their mineral bodies. Gas-form delegates swirled in contained atmospheric chambers, while various humanoid species sat in traditional seating areas. Councillor Yuri, the Velthari Prime Minister, called the session to order with a gentle chime that resonated through the dome. Her people were tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to hold infinite patience. The Velthari had been among the founding members of the Consul, and their world served as the neutral meeting ground for all galactic business. "Welcome, friends, to our monthly gathering," Yuri said, her voice carrying easily through the hall, without amplification. "Today we address the usual matters of trade, territory, and cooperation. Senator Boram will present the quarterly peace report, followed by discussions on the new terraforming regulations." Deho settled into his seat as the session began. He had attended 11 of these meetings now, and they followed the same peaceful pattern every time. Minor disputes were resolved through committee discussions. Trade disagreements were mediated by neutral parties. Territory questions were handled through careful negotiation and compromise. The most violent thing that had happened in recent memory was a strongly worded letter of protest from the insectoid hives about shipping delays. Senator Boram rose from her water tank, her sleek form elegant as she began her report. The cetaceans had taken charge of military oversight centuries ago, though their military was purely ceremonial. "The galaxy remains at complete peace," she announced, her translated voice carrying undertones of satisfaction. "No conflicts of any scale have been reported. Our security forces have handled exactly 0 incidents requiring intervention. Crime rates continue to fall across all member worlds. The universe has never been safer." Scattered applause filled the hall as delegates nodded approvingly. This was how things should be, how they had always been in living memory. Violence was a thing of the ancient past, something primitive species had engaged in before achieving true civilization. As Boram continued her report, Deho noticed whispered conversations starting in various sections. He caught fragments of discussion about humanity, about the new species that had been admitted to the consul. The conversations were not hostile, but they carried an undertone of uncertainty that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. Chairman Min-Su, a towering, crystalline being whose body pulsed with internal light, stood to address the assembly. His species rarely spoke during sessions, preferring to observe and analyze, which made his intervention notable. "I wish to raise a matter of concern regarding our newest members," he said, his voice resonating like struck crystal. "The humans have been among us for 2 years, yet we know very little about their true nature or history." The hall fell silent as all attention turned to Min-Su. Deho felt hundreds of alien eyes focusing on him and his small delegation. "It has come to my attention that human historical records contain irregularities, references to concepts that are difficult to understand, terms that seem to suggest a very different approach to conflict resolution than what we practice here." Several delegates turned to look at Deho, their expressions curious rather than hostile. Observer Tae Young, representing the insectoid, Hives, tilted his triangular head in confusion. What sort of irregularities, Chairman? Surely any species advanced enough to achieve space travel has moved beyond primitive behaviors. Minsu's crystal form flickered as he accessed data files. Their records mention something called warfare extensively. There are references to military organizations and weapons of various types. Most disturbing are frequent mentions of casualties and strategic objectives in contexts that suggest organized violence between groups of their own species. A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembly. The concept of organized violence was so foreign to galactic civilization that many delegates struggled to understand what Minsu was describing. Representative Jiwoo, an energy being whose form crackled with controlled plasma, spoke up. Perhaps these are translation errors, or references to competitive sports? Many species have games that simulate conflict in harmless ways. Daeho knew this moment would come eventually. He had hoped to ease his species into galactic society gradually, allowing their peaceful recent centuries to overshadow their violent past. But the truth had a way of surfacing, especially when dealing with species as thorough as the crystalline beings. He stood slowly, drawing all attention to himself. Chairman Minsu raises valid concerns, Daeho said carefully. Human history does contain extensive records of what we call warfare. These are not translation errors or references to games. They document actual conflicts between human groups throughout our development as a species. The hall erupted in confused murmurs. Counselor Yuri raised her hand for silence, her large eyes wide with concern. Ambassador Daeho, surely you do not mean actual violence, actual harm inflicted deliberately between members of your own species? I do mean exactly that, Daeho replied, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. Human history is filled with conflicts ranging from small disputes between tribes to massive wars involving millions of individuals. This was how our species resolved major disagreements for most of our recorded history. Senator Boram's voice carried notes of shock as she responded. But how did your species survive? How did you advance technologically? How did you achieve space travel while fighting among yourselves? We learned from our conflicts, Daeho explained. Each war taught us lessons about organization, technology, and cooperation. In a strange way, our ability to wage war also developed our ability to work together in large groups toward common goals. The same skills that made us effective in conflict made us effective in peace. Chancellor Young-ho, a gaseous being from the Cloud Cities, swirled anxiously in his containment field. This is deeply disturbing, Ambassador. Are you suggesting that your species still possesses the capability for such violence? Daeho paused, knowing his next words would change everything. We hope never to need such capabilities again. But yes, we retain both the knowledge and the ability to defend ourselves and our allies through force if necessary. We consider this a responsibility rather than a threat. The silence that followed was deafening. Delegates exchanged worried glances, their peaceful worldview suddenly challenged by the presence of a species that had not only survived violence, but thrived because of it. The very idea that conflict could be useful, that violence could serve positive purposes, was beyond their comprehension. Counselor Yuri finally broke the silence, her voice carefully controlled. Perhaps it would be beneficial for all of us to better understand human history and culture. Would you be willing to prepare a presentation for our next session? Something that could help us comprehend these unfamiliar concepts? Daeho nodded, though he felt a deep sense of foreboding. I would be happy to provide such a presentation. However, I must warn you that human military history can be disturbing to species unaccustomed to conflict. What seems normal to us may be shocking to others. We are a mature and sophisticated civilization, Chairman Minsu declared, his crystal form pulsing with confidence. Surely we can handle whatever primitive behaviors your species has outgrown. Knowledge is always preferable to ignorance. As a K, the session ended and delegates began filing out. Daeho remained in his seat, watching the peaceful beings around him. They had no idea what they were asking for. They lived in a galaxy where the worst conflict was a trade dispute, where violence was so foreign it might as well be magic. They were about to learn that their newest allies came from a very different kind of world, where peace was precious precisely because it was so easily lost. He wondered how many of them would still be willing to call humans allies once they understood what humanity was truly capable of. 1 week later, the Galactic Consul reconvened in a specialized viewing chamber deep within the Crystal Dome. The room was smaller than the main assembly hall, designed for detailed presentations and close examination of complex data. Holographic. Projectors hung from the ceiling like metallic flowers, ready to display information in three-dimensional detail. The seating was arranged in a semicircle, allowing all delegates clear views of the presentation area. Ambassador Dae-ho stood at the center of the room, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. He had spent the entire week preparing this presentation, consulting with historians and military experts back on Earth. The challenge was not finding material to show, but deciding what to leave out. Human military history was vast and brutal, and he needed to start gently. Dr. Hee-jin appeared as a hologram beside him, her professional demeanor calm and reassuring. She was one of Earth's leading military historians, a woman who had spent decades studying how human conflict had shaped their civilization. Her presence via long-range communication link would provide expertise that Dae-ho alone could not offer. "Honored delegates," Dae-ho began, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. "Before we begin, I want to emphasize that what you are about to see represents humanity's past, not our present intentions. We show you this history so you may understand how we became the species we are today." Counselor Yuri nodded from her position near the front. Most of the original assembly had returned for this special session, their curiosity overcoming any apprehension they might have felt. The cetaceans floated attentively in their tanks, while the crystalline beings hummed with anticipation. Even the usually aloof gas-form delegates had positioned themselves for optimal viewing. Dr. Hee-jin activated the first holographic display, showing ancient Mediterranean landscapes. "We will begin with what humans consider ancient warfare, conflicts that occurred thousands of years ago when our species was still developing basic technologies." The first images showed Roman legions marching across European plains. The delegates watched with interest as hundreds of men moved in perfect formation, their armor glinting in sunlight, shields locked together in protective walls. To the assembled aliens, it looked almost like a parade or ceremonial display. "These are Roman soldiers," Dr. Hee-jin explained. "They are marching to engage enemy forces in battle. Each soldier carries weapons designed to kill other humans. The shields and armor are meant to protect them from similar weapons carried by their opponents." Observer Tae-young, the insectoid representative, tilted his head in confusion. "But why are they walking toward danger? Would it not be more logical to avoid areas where harm might occur?" "They are walking toward danger because their leaders have decided that controlling territory or resources requires defeating those who currently control them," Dae-ho answered. "In human history, many problems were solved through organized violence when negotiation failed." The hologram shifted to show a Roman battle in progress. Suddenly, the neat formations dissolved into chaos as two armies crashed together. Metal rang against metal as swords met shields. Men fell with wounds that would prove fatal. The carefully organized parade became a desperate struggle for survival. Several delegates gasped as they witnessed actual combat for the first time. Representative Ji-woo's energy form flickered with distress. "They are actually harming each other deliberately. This is not an accident or a natural disaster. They chose to do this." "Yes," Dr. Hee-jin confirmed. "Warfare involves the deliberate use of violence to achieve political, economic, or territorial goals. Both sides understood that many of their warriors would die, but they considered the potential gains worth the cost." The presentation continued through human history, showing medieval knights in heavy armor, their horses charging across battlefields. The delegates watched in growing discomfort as men fought with swords and maces, their weapons designed specifically to penetrate armor and cause fatal injuries. The concept of deliberately creating tools meant only for killing was becoming clear to them. Senator Bo-ram raised herself higher in her tank, her voice carrying notes of distress. "These weapons serve no purpose except to harm other living beings. They cannot be used for construction or food production or any beneficial activity. Why would any species devote resources to creating such things?" because other groups of humans were creating similar weapons, Daeho explained. If one group developed better weapons or tactics, they could defeat groups that had not. This created pressure for all human societies to become skilled at warfare, whether they wanted to or not. The hologram showed samurai warriors fighting in ancient Japan, their curved swords flashing as they moved with deadly grace. The delegates observed the elaborate training and discipline required to become effective warriors, the years of practice needed to master combat skills. This was not primitive fumbling but sophisticated expertise applied to violence. Chairman Minsu's crystal form pulsed with analysis. These individuals have clearly spent considerable time developing their combat abilities. This represents a significant investment of resources and training. Your species deliberately created specialists in violence. Every human society did, Dr. Hyojin confirmed. Warriors, soldiers, knights, samurai, every culture developed its own version of trained fighters. Military leadership became one of the most important skills in human civilization. As the presentation moved forward in time, the scale of warfare began to increase. The delegates watched Napoleon's armies marching across Europe, thousands of men moving in coordinated campaigns that spanned entire continents. The logistics required to feed, equip, and move such massive forces impressed even the most advanced alien civilizations. These campaigns involved more individual humans than the total population of many galactic species, observed Chancellor Young-ho, his gaseous form swirling with agitation. Your species was organizing violence on a scale that exceeds our largest peaceful endeavors. The hologram showed the Battle of Waterloo, where over 100,000 men fought in a single day. Cannons fired explosive shells into packed formations of soldiers. Cavalry charges swept across bloody fields where thousands lay dead or dying. The mathematical precision with which humans calculated acceptable losses shocked delegates who struggled to accept the death of a single individual. In this single battle, approximately 50,000 humans were killed or wounded, Dr. Hyojin stated matter-of-factly. Both sides considered this an acceptable cost for the strategic advantages they sought to gain. Several delegates rose from their seats and quietly left the chamber. The feline representatives from the Purr Collective looked physically ill, their ears flattened against their heads. Even species that were natural predators found the organized nature of human violence disturbing. The presentation reached the American Civil War, showing the industrial capacity that humans had devoted to warfare. Factories produced rifles, ammunition, and artillery pieces by the thousands. Railroads moved armies across vast distances with unprecedented speed. The war became a contest of industrial production as much as military skill. Your species was manufacturing violence, gasped Representative Wu Jin from the Scale Dominion. You built entire industries devoted to creating tools of death. This was not occasional conflict, but systematic preparation for war. By this time, warfare had become one of the primary drivers of human technological advancement, Daeho admitted. Many of our most important innovations came from military necessity. Better transportation, communication, manufacturing, and medicine all developed more rapidly because of military needs. The hologram displayed photographs from World War I, showing trenches stretching across France like scars in the earth. Millions of men lived in these muddy holes, fighting for months over strips of land measured in meters. Poison gas drifted across battlefields, and machine guns cut down advancing soldiers by the thousands. The remaining delegates sat in stunned silence as they processed what they were seeing. Entire landscapes had been transformed into killing fields. Humans had created weapons so effective that advancing across open ground became impossible, leading to years of static warfare where millions died for minimal territorial gains. This conflict lasted 4 years and involved most of the major human nations, Dr. Hyojin explained. Approximately 20 million humans died, with millions more wounded. It was called the Great War, and the war to end all wars, because humans believed nothing could ever be worse. Observer Tae-young's compound eyes focused intently on the images. But if humans learned that warfare was so destructive, surely this convinced your species to abandon violence and pursue peaceful solutions? Daeho's expression grew grim. Unfortunately, that war ended in 1918, In 1939, an even larger conflict began. We called it World War II, and it would prove that humans had barely begun to explore the possibilities of organized violence. The chamber fell completely silent as delegates realized that what they had witnessed so far was only the beginning. The primitive weapons and small-scale conflicts of earlier eras had been leading somewhere, building towards something even more devastating. The viewing chamber felt different when the Galactic Consul reconvened for the third session. Nearly 200 seats that had been occupied the previous week now stood empty. Word about the human war documentation had spread throughout the Consul, and many delegates had chosen to review written transcripts rather than witness the actual footage. Those who remained sat with visible tension, their various forms of alien body language all expressing the same emotion: dread. Emergency medical teams had been stationed around the chamber after multiple delegates had required assistance during the previous session. Dr. Yunji, a feline humanoid from the Purr Collective, sat near the medical station with recording equipment, trying to understand human military thinking from an analytical perspective. Her ears twitched nervously as she prepared to document what promised to be even more disturbing revelations. Ambassador Daeho took his position at the center of the chamber, joined once again by Dr. Haijin's holographic presence. This time, they were accompanied by General Sung Ho, a retired human military officer whose weathered face spoke of decades spent understanding warfare. His addition to the presentation team had been necessary as they moved into more complex military topics. "Honored delegates," Daeho began, his voice carrying across the reduced assembly. "Today we examine what happened when human warfare entered the industrial age. We will see how humans applied mass production, advanced chemistry, and mechanical engineering to the art of conflict." Counselor Yuri, still present but visibly strained from the previous sessions, gestured for the presentation to begin. Her usual graceful composure had been replaced by careful control as she struggled to process concepts that challenged everything her peaceful species believed about civilization. The holographic display activated, showing factories from the early 1940s. Massive production lines stretched as far as the camera could see, with thousands of humans working to produce tanks, aircraft, and weapons. The scale of industrial mobilization was immediately apparent to the assembled delegates, most of whom came from species that had never devoted significant resources to military purposes. "This is human industrial capacity applied to warfare," General Sung Ho explained, his translated voice carrying the authority of experience. During World War II, human nations converted their entire economies to military production. Factories that had made automobiles began producing tanks. Companies that created household goods started manufacturing ammunition. Representative Jiwoo's energy form crackled with disbelief. "Your entire civilization reorganized itself for the purpose of creating weapons? Not just military specialists, but everyone participated in preparing for violence?" "Everyone," confirmed Dr. Haijin. "Women worked in munitions factories while men fought overseas. Children collected scrap metal for military use. Scientists abandoned peaceful research to develop better weapons. For several years, the primary goal of human civilization was becoming more effective at warfare. The hologram shifted to show tank battles across European plains. Massive metal vehicles, each weighing dozens of tons, maneuvered across landscapes while firing explosive shells at each other. The delegates watched in fascination and horror as these mechanical beasts engaged in deadly combat, their armor designed to withstand tremendous punishment while dealing out even more. Observer Tae Young, one of the few insectoid delegates still attending, studied the footage intently. "These machines are incredibly sophisticated. The engineering required to create mobile platforms capable of both offense and defense represents advanced technological achievement, yet they serve no purpose except destruction. Tank design drove innovations in metallurgy, engines, communication, systems, and precision manufacturing," General Sung Ho noted. "Many peacetime technologies emerged from military engineering. The same techniques used to build better tanks later built better transportation and construction equipment." The presentation moved to aerial warfare, showing formations of bombers flying over enemy territory. The delegates watched hundreds of aircraft working together in coordinated missions, their bomb loads capable of destroying entire city blocks. Fighter planes engaged in aerial combat, pilots demonstrating skills that required years of training and split-second decision-making. Senator Boram raised herself in her tank, her voice carrying notes of incredulity. These humans are fighting battles in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Land, sea, and air forces all coordinate their actions. The complexity of command and control systems required for such operations exceeds anything we use for peaceful purposes. Modern warfare requires integration of multiple combat domains, General Sung-ho agreed. Air superiority affects ground operations. Naval power influences coastal battles. Electronic warfare disrupts communications. Human military doctrine accounts for all these factors simultaneously. The hologram displayed footage from the D-Day landings showing the largest amphibious assault in human history. Over 150,000 soldiers landed on hostile beaches while naval gunfire and air strikes supported their advance. The coordination required to move men, equipment, and supplies across dangerous waters under enemy fire demonstrated military logistics on a scale that impressed even the most advanced galactic civilizations. The sight of thousands of humans willingly running toward heavily defended positions caused observer Tae Young to begin hyperventilating. The concept of soldiers knowingly advancing into situations where death was likely challenged his species' fundamental survival instincts. Medical teams rushed to assist him as his compound eyes rolled back in distress. "Why do they advance when they know many will die?" gasped Chancellor Young-ho, his gaseous form swirling frantically. "This violates every rational survival strategy. They are deliberately choosing actions that will result in their own destruction." Because the mission was more important than individual survival, General Sung-ho explained. Human soldiers are trained to accept personal risk for strategic objectives. They understand that some must die so that others may live and the greater goal can be achieved. The footage continued with scenes from the Pacific Theater, showing island-hopping campaigns where humans fought for small pieces of land across vast oceanic distances. The delegates observed battles in jungles, mountains, and coral atolls, each requiring different tactics and equipment. Human adaptability in warfare seemed limitless. When the presentation reached kamikaze attacks, showing Japanese pilots deliberately crashing their aircraft into enemy ships, Ambassador Wu Jin from the Scaled Dominion collapsed entirely. The concept of weaponized suicide was so alien to reptilian psychology that his nervous system simply shut down rather than process the information. Medical teams carried his unconscious form from the chamber. "These pilots are using themselves as weapons," Dr. Yoonji observed, her analytical mind struggling with the implications. "They have calculated that their own death, combined with their aircraft's explosive potential, creates more value than their continued survival. This represents a mathematical approach to existence that we cannot comprehend." Desperate times led to desperate measures, Dr. Hai-jin acknowledged. When conventional tactics failed, humans sometimes resorted to unconventional solutions. The willingness to sacrifice oneself for others was considered honorable in many human cultures. The holographic display showed urban warfare in destroyed cities, where humans fought building by building through rubble and ruins. Delegates watched soldiers moving through environments that resembled industrial accidents, yet continuing to fight effectively despite the devastation around them. The human ability to function in destroyed civilizations shocked species accustomed to pristine environments. "Your warriors continued fighting even when their cities were destroyed?" asked Counselor Yoonji, her ears flat against her head. "Most species would surrender rather than endure such destruction of their habitat. Humans often fought harder when their homes were threatened," General Sung-ho replied. "Destroyed cities became defensive advantages. Rubble provided cover. Ruined buildings became fortresses. Human soldiers learned to turn any environment into a battlefield." As the session progressed, more delegates quietly excused themselves. The revelation that humans could adapt warfare to any environment, from frozen tundra to tropical jungles to urban ruins, painted a picture of a species that had encountered virtually every possible combat situation and developed effective responses to all of them. The presentation concluded with footage of massive artillery barrages, showing thousands of cannons firing simultaneously in preparation for infantry attacks. The sound alone, transmitted through the holographic system, was enough to cause several delegates to flee the chamber. The earth-shaking roar of massed firepower was unlike anything they had experienced. This concludes our examination of conventional warfare, Dr. Hyjin announced as the display faded. Next week, we will discuss weapons of mass destruction and the human approach to strategic deterrence. Chairman Min Su, one of the few core world representatives still present, pulsed with agitation. Weapons of mass destruction? You mean are forms of warfare even more devastating than what we have witnessed? Daeho nodded grimly. What you have seen so far involves conventional weapons. Explosives, bullets. The viewing chamber had become a medical zone by the time the fourth session convened. Only 127 delegates remained from the original assembly of over 800, and emergency response teams outnumbered some species' entire delegations. Director So Young, from Galactic Mental Health Services, had established a temporary treatment center outside the chamber, staffed with specialists in multi-species psychological trauma. The attendance numbers told their own story. Less than 15% of the consul was willing to continue learning about human military capabilities. Ambassador Daeho stood before the drastically reduced assembly, accompanied by Admiral Kyung-soo, whose expertise in naval strategy and nuclear doctrine would be essential for the day's presentation. The holographic projectors had been modified to include warning systems that would alert medical teams when particularly disturbing footage was about to be displayed. Honored delegates, Daeho began, his voice echoing in the half-empty chamber. Today we examine humanity's entry into the nuclear age and the development of weapons capable of destroying entire civilizations. I want to emphasize that what you will see represents both humanity's greatest technological achievement and our most sobering responsibility. Counselor Yuri, visibly aged by the previous sessions, gestured weakly for the presentation to begin. Her species' natural grace had been replaced by careful psychological preparation as she braced herself for revelations that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. The holographic display activated, showing the mushroom cloud rising over Hiroshima. The delegates watched in absolute silence as a single explosion consumed an entire city in seconds, leaving behind devastation on a scale that exceeded anything they had witnessed in previous sessions. The sheer magnitude of destruction achievable with one weapon transcended their understanding of violence. This is a nuclear weapon, Admiral Kyung-soo explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent decades thinking about ultimate destruction. It derives its power from the fundamental forces that hold matter together. When those forces are released, they create explosions equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives. Chancellor Young-ho's gaseous form contracted into the smallest possible configuration within his containment field. His species had evolved in stable atmospheric conditions, and the concept of weapons that could vaporize entire environments triggered deep survival instincts. You created devices that harness the power of stars for the purpose of destroying your own cities? The technology was initially developed as a tool to end World War II quickly, Dr. Hyjin clarified through her holographic presence. The alternative was a conventional invasion of Japan that would have resulted in millions of casualties on both sides. The atomic bombs killed hundreds of thousands, but potentially saved millions. The hologram showed the aftermath of Nagasaki, with survivors wandering through radioactive ruins where a thriving city had existed moments before. Delegates observed humans emerging from the devastation, their bodies burned by radiation, their civilization temporarily erased by their own technological achievement. The human capacity to inflict such damage on themselves while continuing to function as a society baffled species that considered minor injuries traumatic. Observer Tae Young, heavily sedated after his breakdown in the previous session, managed to speak through his medical translator. Your species created weapons capable of destroying yourselves completely, then used them against your own kind. This suggests a level of desperation or madness that we cannot comprehend. It suggests a willingness to accept ultimate consequences, to achieve strategic objectives, Admiral Kyung-soo corrected. Nuclear weapons change the fundamental nature of human conflict. For the first time in our history, we possess the ability to completely destroy our enemies, but only at the cost of ensuring our own destruction. The presentation moved to the Cold War era, showing the massive nuclear arsenals that human nations had accumulated. Thousands of missiles, each carrying warheads hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs used on Japan, sat in underground silos and submarine launch tubes. The delegates learned about intercontinental ballistic missiles that could deliver nuclear destruction to any point on Earth within 30 minutes. "These weapons could destroy your entire planet," gasped Representative Jiwoo, her energy form flickering with distress. "Yet you built thousands of them. Why would any species create the means of their own extinction?" "Mutually assured destruction," Admiral Kyung-soo replied. "The doctrine that prevented nuclear war by making it too catastrophic to survive. Both sides knew that launching nuclear weapons would result in the complete destruction of their own civilization, so neither side could risk using them. The concept of maintaining peace through the threat of total annihilation was so alien to galactic psychology that several delegates required immediate medical attention. Dr. Yun-ji, still taking analytical notes despite her obvious distress, struggled to understand the logic behind human strategic thinking. The hologram displayed nuclear submarines, massive vessels that could remain hidden beneath Earth's oceans for months, while carrying enough firepower to devastate continents. Delegates watched these underwater weapons platforms conducting secret patrols, their crews living in metal tubes surrounded by devices capable of ending civilization. The dedication required to operate such systems impressed even species known for their technological sophistication. "Your military personnel lived inside these underwater vessels, surrounded by nuclear weapons for extended periods?" asked Senator Boram, her aquatic nature making her particularly sensitive to submarine operations. "They voluntarily isolated themselves in small spaces while carrying the means of global destruction? Submarine crews were among our most elite military personnel," Admiral Kyung-soo confirmed. "They understood that their mission was to remain hidden and ready to retaliate if their homeland was attacked. Most submarine patrols occurred without incident, but the crews had to be prepared to end the world if ordered to do so." The presentation revealed the underground bunkers and command centers that human leaders would use during nuclear warfare. Miles of tunnels carved into solid rock, equipped with communication systems that could function even after the surface world was destroyed. The delegates learned about continuity of government plans that assumed most of human civilization would be eliminated in the opening hours of nuclear conflict. Director So-young's medical teams worked frantically as more delegates experienced psychological breakdowns. The revelation that humans had created detailed plans for functioning during and after the complete destruction of their own species exceeded the trauma tolerance of civilizations that considered natural disasters existentially threatening. "You plan to continue governing even after your civilization was destroyed?" Chancellor Young-ho asked, his voice barely audible through his translator. "You created systems that would function in a world where most of your species was dead?" "Leadership. Continuity was considered essential for post-war recovery," Dr. Hyejin explained. "Even in the worst-case scenarios, someone needed to coordinate survival efforts and eventually rebuild civilization. These bunkers represented humanity's refusal to accept extinction even in the face of ultimate destruction." The hologram showed hydrogen bombs being tested in the Pacific, their explosions dwarfing even the atomic weapons used on Japan. These thermonuclear devices could destroy entire metropolitan areas with single detonations, creating firestorms that would consume everything within dozens of miles. The mathematical precision with which humans calculated acceptable levels of devastation horrified delegates who struggled with the concept of any intentional destruction. As the session progressed, the presentation moved beyond nuclear weapons to other forms of mass destruction. Chemical weapons that could kill without leaving physical damage. Biological weapons that could spread disease faster than natural epidemics. Electronic warfare systems that could blind entire civilizations by destroying their communication networks. "Your species developed multiple ways to destroy yourselves," observed Dr. Yun-ji, her analytical mind overwhelmed by the variety of human destructive capabilities. "You created redundant systems for civilizational collapse, as if ensuring that no possible method of mass destruction was overlooked. We also developed defenses against all of these threats," Admiral Kyung-soo noted. "Anti-missile systems, protective equipment, medical countermeasures, and electronic warfare defenses. Human military doctrine always included both offensive and defensive capabilities." The presentation concluded with modern precision warfare, showing satellite-guided munitions that could strike individual buildings from thousands of miles away. Delegates watched drones conducting surveillance and combat operations, while their human controllers sat safely on different continents. The evolution from crude nuclear weapons to surgical precision strikes demonstrated humanity's continual refinement of their destructive capabilities. Even when you possessed weapons capable of destroying planets, you continued developing more precise methods of destruction, Chancellor Young-ho observed. You never stopped improving your ability to wage war, even during periods of peace. The final session of the human military presentation convened in a chamber that felt more like a medical facility than a diplomatic venue. Only 31 delegates remained from the original assembly of over 800. Empty seats stretched. In all directions, a monument to the psychological casualties of learning about human warfare. Half of the Galactic Consul had submitted formal resignations over the past month, citing irreconcilable differences with human military doctrine and severe trauma from exposure to concepts their species had never imagined. President Nari, hastily elected to emergency leadership after most senior officials had resigned, struggled to maintain order in what remained of galactic government. Her species, the empathic healers, were naturally suited to emotional support but completely unprepared for managing a civilization-wide crisis. Medical teams outnumbered delegates 3-1, and portable psychiatric units lined the walls like silent witnesses to the collapse of peaceful assumptions. Ambassador Dae-ho took his position for the final time, accompanied by researcher Dong-hyun, a human anthropologist specializing in military culture, and Judge Jae-hoon, the last remaining representative from the core worlds. The crystalline being's form pulsed with barely controlled agitation as he prepared to witness the conclusion of humanity's devastating educational program. Honored delegates, Dae-ho began, addressing the sparse assembly. Today we conclude our examination of human military capabilities by discussing individual, soldier training, and special operations forces. We will also address the philosophical frameworks that make human warfare possible. The holographic projectors activated, showing human soldiers undergoing training that would have been considered torture by galactic standards. Delegates watched. Men and women deliberately subjected to physical hardship, psychological stress, and simulated combat conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The volunteers appeared eager to endure such treatment, competing with each other to qualify for even more demanding programs. These individuals are preparing to become special operations forces, researcher Dong-hyun explained. They undergo training designed to create soldiers capable of operating independently in hostile environments, often behind enemy lines with minimal support. The footage showed Navy SEALs conducting underwater operations, Army Rangers rappelling from helicopters into combat zones, and Special Forces soldiers living among foreign populations while gathering intelligence. Each demonstration revealed levels of individual capability that exceeded what most galactic species could achieve with their entire military forces. Observer Tae-young, the sole remaining insectoid delegate, watched through heavy sedation as human soldiers performed feats that his hive mind species considered impossible for individual organisms. These humans operate alone or in small groups, making independent decisions without consulting central authority. This violates every principle of organized society. Human military doctrine emphasizes individual initiative and adaptability, researcher Dong-hyun confirmed. Soldiers are trained to complete missions even when cut off from command structure, using their own judgment to make life-or-death decisions in rapidly changing situations. The hologram displayed footage from actual special operations missions, showing small teams of humans infiltrating heavily defended positions, gathering intelligence, and eliminating specific targets with surgical precision. The delegates observed soldiers moving through darkness, avoiding detection by superior numbers of enemies, then striking with devastating effectiveness before disappearing again. Your warriors can function effectively even when vastly outnumbered and operating in hostile territory controlled by enemies, asked President Nari, her empathic abilities overwhelmed by the emotional residue of human military thinking. They willingly enter situations where discovery means certain death? Elite forces are trained to operate in exactly such conditions, Dae-ho confirmed. They understand that their missions often require accepting extreme personal risk to achieve strategic objectives that benefit their entire civilization. The presentation moved to psychological warfare and intelligence operations, showing how humans gathered information about enemy capabilities and intentions. Delegates learned about code breaking, interrogation techniques, and the systematic study of opponent behavior patterns. The revelation that humans had developed science-based approaches to understanding and manipulating enemy decision-making processes shocked species that considered privacy violations unthinkable. Judge Jae-hoon's crystalline form flickered with computational activity as he processed the implications. Your species has created systematic methods for penetrating the thoughts and plans of other intelligent beings? You study your enemies with the same scientific rigor that we apply to stellar phenomena? Intelligence gathering is fundamental to effective military operations, researcher Dong Hyun replied. Understanding enemy capabilities, intentions, and weaknesses allows human forces to achieve objectives with minimal casualties on both sides. Knowledge prevents unnecessary violence. The hologram showed asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how small groups of humans could effectively resist much larger conventional forces through guerrilla tactics, improvised weapons, and intimate knowledge of local terrain. Delegates watched farmers and civilians transforming into effective fighters when their homes were threatened, using everything from kitchen knives to fertilizer bombs in desperate resistance efforts. Any human population can become a military force when threatened, gasped Chancellor Young-ho, his gaseous form contracted to minimum volume within his containment field. Your civilians possess the knowledge and will to fight using improvised weapons and unconventional tactics. Human history shows that ordinary people will fight with extraordinary determination when their families and homes are threatened, Dae-ho acknowledged. This makes occupying human territory extremely difficult, as any attempt to control our populations by force will encounter resistance that grows stronger over time. The presentation revealed theoretical war plans that humans had developed for fighting various galactic species, complete with detailed analyses of alien physiologies, technologies, and tactical weaknesses. The delegates discovered that humanity had been quietly studying every member species of the Consul since joining, developing strategies for both alliance and conflict with each civilization. President Nari's voice trembled as she asked the question that had haunted the remaining delegates. Do humans intend to wage war against the galaxy? Have you been preparing to attack us while pretending to seek peaceful cooperation? Dae-ho's response carried the weight of absolute sincerity. We sincerely hope we never have to fight any galactic species, but we have learned that hoping for peace while being unprepared for war typically results in neither peace nor victory. We study potential threats not because we seek conflict, but because being prepared for it makes conflict less likely. The hologram displayed human military academies where officers studied not just tactics and strategy, but history, psychology, and ethics. Delegates observed humans learning about the moral implications of warfare, the responsibilities of command, and the importance of minimizing civilian casualties even during the most intense conflicts. Your warriors are also philosophers? Asked Judge Jae-hoon, his analytical mind struggling with the contradiction between human military effectiveness and their apparent moral sophistication. They study ethics while learning to kill efficiently? The most effective human military leaders understand that warfare serves political purposes, researcher Dong Hyun explained. They must know not just how to win battles, but why those battles should be fought and what constitutes acceptable methods of victory. Human military ethics exist precisely because our weapons are so powerful. As the presentation concluded, the holographic display showed humanity's space-based military capabilities. Orbital weapons platforms, military spacecraft, and defense systems designed to protect Earth from extraterrestrial threats. The delegates realized that humans had been preparing for interstellar warfare long before joining galactic civilization. You developed weapons for fighting in space before you even encountered other intelligent species? President Nari asked, her empathic senses overwhelmed by the implications. You assumed that contact with alien civilizations would eventually lead to conflict? We hoped for peaceful contact, Dae-ho replied. But we prepared for alternatives. Human history taught us that first contact between different civilizations often involves misunderstandings that can lead to violence if both sides are not careful. Judge Jae-hoon pulsed with final analysis as he prepared his species' official response to the presentation. Ambassador Dae-ho, Your species possesses military capabilities that exceed the combined forces of the entire Galactic Consul. You have demonstrated the ability to wage war on scales that would devastate our civilization. Yet you claim to seek peace. How can we reconcile these contradictions? The same way humans have done for centuries, Deho answered. By remembering that the purpose of superior military strength is to make its use unnecessary. We maintain these capabilities not because we enjoy violence,